Yeah, thank you very much, Gary, for your kind words and your words of appreciation. Very welcome. I'm going to present a little bit today about managing a global supply chain from your home. It's not all good news, but there is a little bit of good news. There's a lot of bad news. But I'm going to tell you the stories of two executives, one in the UK, who works for a big automobile company, multinational, and one in Illinois in North America. Gary will know it well. Another one over there. So I'm going to present their story. Hopefully you'll find it interesting and something a little bit different to what you might have been hearing. I'll try and give it straight. I'll try not to put too much of Gary Graham in there and give you some academic kind of fiction. I'll try and give you the reality of what I'm hearing and communicate some of the thoughts, but obviously give it a little bit of academic structure. So it's trying to, like I say to the people, it's a bit like stories from the front line, grounded kind of like journalism kind of style to it, investigative, trying to get real earth feeling to life rather than some kind of book kind of fiction, which is far from reality. And let's see what they're saying anyway. These guys, let's see what they're thinking and whether it fits with your thoughts. I see the natural supply chain of the life has been driven by entrepreneurial capital, and operations managers, like a lot of people in the business will know, tend to follow the strategists, the marketeers, the entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurs find where the capital is, find where they can get the most profit, and what you do is you locate your plant. If it's a manufacturing plant, you locate it in that area where you can make most profit. You follow the entrepreneurial capital. But what happened with COVID when it hit the UK in March, and when we locked down on March the 23rd, is really for us, for the UK, and also you hit what we call a dam. So I put there a dam, this is a beaver's dam. And basically what happens is that your global supply chains are basically like a river going down a mountain. Everything's great, it's going along, and then suddenly we hit this COVID epidemic, so COVID pandemic, and it's really like it's been hitting a dam. And we're at that dam now, and we're just starting to come through the dam. And where we're going to go next is very interesting, and lots of different theories. Are we going to have a more sustainable world? Are we just going to return to business as normal? When are we going to return back to some kind of normality? What is going to be the impact on the operation? So I think it's a very interesting conjunction point of history. And for operations supply chains, we're in a period of crisis for a number of industries, as you might know, and we're very much at a turning point. So it's going to be interesting to see how things map forward. So this is a simple framework, resilience framework offered by Yossi Sheffi at MIT. He wrote this in a famous book called The Resilient Enterprise, and it came out in 2005. And basically what it does, it tries to map out a typical crisis, usually with impact lasting 30 days. And what is, so you prepare for it, you respond to the crisis, it might be an earthquake or a hurricane, flooding, and you prepare and you recover, and it takes time to bounce back. It's very much about the supply side. It's about the supply side issues like plants, number of workers, getting your material to the manufacturer, getting the end goods from the manufacturer to the distributor, to the retailer. It takes time, short amount of time. So that's the kind of stages of this. So what we tried to do is say, right, okay, you've got three phases to COVID. You've got the preparedness, going into COVID, where we had some preparation time, because we knew that COVID was hitting other countries, China, then into Italy, then into Spain, and then by some miraculous incident, it suddenly hit the UK. But anyway, we've got preparedness, we've got the response to that, and then we've got the recovery, which we're entering now. You could argue the response into recovery. So a nice kind of diagram to shape things through. So study design then. So I'll just go back one. I've got involved with two executives, a senior operations director and vice president of manufacturing and supply chain management, automotive industry supplier, we call them Auto in the UK. And then in America, we've got an infrastructural company, We're talking there with the head of global supply chain management, and basically we're doing a very, very simplistic kind of investigation. We're just getting people to keep diaries over the period from March the 1st to September the 1st, 2020, and then try and supplement that with other material to see exactly, what is the picture from the front line, how they're coping with it. Both these have been managing their global supply chain from their bedrooms. So they made a little office in their bedrooms, and they've been managing these very complex supply chains from their bedrooms since March the 1st. Both of them have not been back into their plants during the COVID crisis. So a bit like me and Gary and other academics, and probably most of yourselves have been limbering at home, trying to look busy. So if we take the auto company, in terms of preparedness, so we're talking very much the supply side kind of issue. What we ask them to do is just map out, what products are you making, what products are you distributing, what's the risk level with those products, so some kind of contingency. And we've got things like the powertrain. If you're making a car component, a powertrain component, it's high risk, high value. You've got other products, low risk, low value. So obviously the alarm bells are ringing around certain things where there's a high risk to them and they may have an high value, like the powertrains, and say they transition to electric vehicles. So you may be a small customer for auto lighting or electronics. Again, it's putting your business, making you vulnerable. So this is around about March time when we did this. I went up to the northeast and got the contact to sort of map out these kind of risks. We spent half a day with him, and he was kind of getting worried at that time. This is around about March the 10th, I think it was, or March 10th, 11th, yep, just before it started to hit the lockdown. So it's very, very interesting to find that. So I've just mapped out here the chain of events of what hit this automotive company. So I've simplified it and I've taken a snapshot of things. So you've got the plants in China making the components. Now I was brought up on lean manufacturing, like a number of those who've done operations and lean production. Unfortunately, it's a myth for a lot of the automotive companies. They disbanded with that years ago. And what's been happening for the last decade, is there's been building massive stockpiles of components and products in China. And then it's usually taken 6 to 8 days to get them back to Europe, to a plant in Europe, where they start putting them into sub-assemblies. In places like in northern Spain, in northern Italy, Romania, Ukraine, and Poland in Central Europe. And then what happens is that these kind of sub-assemblies are then brought through into two distribution units, two distribution plants in Essex and Oxford. And then they come up to the northeast by road. So you've got China into Central Europe and Northern Europe, sorry, into Central Europe, Southern Europe, and then into Southern England, and then up the road up north, up the M1. And what was happening when this kicked off in February, March time, they started getting problems in China and delays to stock and components going missing. So you had the problems of parts, you had the problems of tools, parts and tools for the plant. And so this kind of like disrupted it. There had been a lagging lead time, getting the products into Europe, again another lead time, and then they started getting worried that we're going to have problems here. Now the big plants in the northeast, the original equipment suppliers and OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, these guys are working on lead times of deliveries of hours. Literally their plant have got zero stock, and they rely on these deliveries within hours to get to them. Not carrying very little stock. So they were getting worried, as you can understand. There's a knock-on effect. You got your upstream, start things going wrong in China. The concentrations near Wuhan and Shanghai. And that's starting to get to fail and products close, and then we're getting this knock-on effect. Now these guys in the auto and the infrastructure were very confident. They dealt with disruptions, for a long time now. They're well educated on it, full of MBAs and people working for them who went through all resilience planning and all that. But the thing what they didn't cover was people. So they were caught out by your workforce going ill. So that's not just your workforce on your plant, but that's workforce doing the logistics, people in the distribution unit, cleaners, security guards. So they're finding that people was starting to be a big issue for them, and they hadn't planned for that. And you're relying on all these little bits of the supply chain to link together. And this was a problem which they've been having in Illinois recently, as well as the auto, is that it takes one or two plants to go down, and your whole supply chain freezes. Do you know what I mean? So you can have hundreds of suppliers or thousands of suppliers. It just takes one or two of them, and you start hitting problems, And this is what were happening. So they were getting panicking, as you could imagine. So this is just a chain of events: supply risk, demand risk, things going on in China. So what we got, the guy in the UK and in America, the Illinois people, was to say, what's happening, what you're thinking going ahead, how you're going to plan for it. There's some demand issues. They realised the economy was starting to tank a little bit. Then we went into lockdown. Then they went into furlough. So you get the situation in the UK where you furloughed the plant. So basically you're managing an empty plant, but then you're not managing an empty supply chain or an empty supply network, because parts of that supply network, say in China, get back up and running. Parts of Europe are still operating, in Germany, etc. So we got interesting situations where your plant may have gone down and furloughed, say in the UK, but the network's still operating. It may only be like 30% of capacity, but it's still operating. You're still making decisions. We're finding who was it? We're telling John in England, in the UK, sorry. That he was running at the plant, and the guy a lady in China was running the plant, and the one in Poland was running the plant. So what was happening was that you're getting right down to plant level. So they're moving away in the auto, this case, they're moving away from kind of global top level management and getting really firefighting down at an individual plant level. So for instance, one issue was packaging. You're sending products into Europe, across Europe, but there was no the packaging was not coming back because of restrictions, because of embargoes, because of boundary and border restrictions. So the packaging may go with your product out, and it usually come back to you, but it wasn't. It was staying in the location. So we get an interesting kind of supply kind of crisis going on there. So what we've just done, this is just a simple software called Leximancer, just trying to identify from the diary notes some of the topics they were talking about. They're talking about supply, obviously, demand, disruption, crisis, recovery, inventory, and lean. So just getting an idea of topics coming from these diaries and from their accounts. Just get a feel of what's relevant and what's emerging. So then what we tend to do is we worked a bit further, and we start to pin them down a little bit, and we said to them, can you identify a couple of key issues which are really impacting on supply chains? And the first one is the state of globalization from the pandemic. So this is the crisis. What's been the impact? The state of globalization, and the vulnerability it puts you under, and having long supply chains, lacking visibility, problems with transparency, not really realizing where your parts are, your tools and people. So it can get very complex, and we lose control of that. The other kind of issue is what I'd argue, which we've never seen in history before, is what we call a unique bullwhip effect. And what I'd call it is a double helix bullwhip effect, where you get massive amplifications in demand in certain parts of the supply chain, and then you're getting breakdowns in the supply in other parts of the supply chain. So even though you're getting plants get up and running, say in Central Europe, they were sucking in parts from China. Says China got back up and running in April, but then this was leading to a lot of spiraling effects in demand and in losing demand. You also got the problem in other industries where demand was rocketing, say for people like Amazon. So the demand was increasing dramatically, and the supply couldn't keep up with it. Take your plant back into operation. Obviously, you need a lot of PPE, and you need sanitizing gel, blah blah. You've heard all the stories about this, I'm sure, in the media. And for the manufacturer, likewise. So we're getting an interesting kind of concept of ripples going around the network, around the world. Some plants closing, some plants open. You're getting spikes in demand in China for products and parts and equipment, sucking that through, and then other parts where demand has just hit the floor. So it's a very much mixed picture of demand and different oscillations of demand patterns going up and down the supply chain. An absolute nightmare to manage, to be honest. So that was the other thing. And the third thing, which I think we were quite interested in exploring, but we started to feel about, if you had local production, would it make it easier? So could you keep your plant going if you didn't have the long supply chain and you didn't have this massive pipeline? Could you keep your supply chain concertinaed around the local area? Would it have made it easier if all your suppliers had been located in the Northeast or located in Illinois or in North America, you know, and you'd have been able to manage them quicker, and it's a lot more compressed. It's not as elongated. It's not as long. It's not as much more difficult to manage. So keeping that interesting. Right. So that was you know, fairly kind of, I think up to that point, Gary, there wasn't anything I'd say which was really fascinating or really surprising. We'd seen similar kind of patterns going on before in other crises, yeah, but this was lasting longer. Now, what starts happening in May, this story gets a lot interesting for us, for everybody here, I think, and for researchers, is that we suddenly started seeing that this supply crisis was, in May time, starting to become a demand crisis in North America and in UK stroke Europe. And the first hints of that was May the 9th, when one of this company's customers, Nissan, did a massive restructuring program and closed their Barcelona plant and restructured production. And Europe was going to start looking after smaller cars like the Renault, which is part of their branding, part of their company brand. Nissan's branding is Renault. They own Renault, so they're in a joint venture with Renault, and they started making Renault cars in Europe. And in the UK, they started saying, right, in the UK, we're going to focus totally on the SUVs, on the sport and utility vehicles. And that announcement came out in around about May the 9th. Then we started getting, I can't name them, but we started getting rumours of 600 redundancies at a major infrastructural company in Europe. Then we started hearing people like Accenture and a lot of consultants to these manufacturers laying people off. And then what became apparent is that the furloughing system, was, like we've been saying in the press a little bit, is kind of like, is a bit of a mask. It's a bit of a Trojan horse. It's kind of like hiding a lot of pressing issues. And one of the pressing issues, especially for the car industry, is flat demand. They start spotting this in May time and started getting worried about what is going to happen in the future, where we're going to go. Now in America, and the infrastructural people, they were more confident. They were saying, oh, well, you know, we're an infrastructural supplier. Okay, China's getting up and running now, so some of our competitors are investing in R&D and training and really pushing ahead, and that's worrying us because we can't innovate, and we're only operating at 30 capacity, but we were confident. But even they now, when we're talking to them, are starting to get more and more concerned of this demand issue starting to come across a lot of their market. So if we look at S&P Global Economics, you know, if we're going to recover, and supply chains are inextricably linked to economics and the economic system, and we could argue really that it's no longer a supply chain issue we're talking about here, we're talking of a business model issue. And is that if we look at this model here, you know, there's different ways, it's different scenarios. There's an optimistic scenario A, there's a moderate one, or there's an absolutely kind of worrying one, C, which shows that we don't get back in these companies and maybe in a number of other companies to the position we were before the pandemic. And now we've got what the fear I'm hearing, say, from a lot of American manufacturers when they talk about the UK, is their fear for the UK, not just about this pandemic, but also the impact of Brexit. And they were saying things like, you know, with Brexit, this scenario 3C will get even worse. And you could see evaporation of supply chains, you know, in the UK. For instance, would Nissan stay with tariffs? No, they will not. Nissan loses 30,000 jobs. That'll be 90,000 because most supply chains have a multiplier effect of 3. So that's worrying, you know what I mean? So, and the limitations on the demand in the UK and the infrastructural program. So just to see what's happening now, moving forward with the demand issues. you know, in the earth movement in the US is fearing that competitors are innovating, training, building up the capacity very, very quickly in the Far East, pushing on competitiveness. Workers are liable now for, sorry, you have liability as an employer for workers for COVID in America. So if someone gets COVID, you're liable for that in your plant. So that puts you in a bit of a back foot. They're looking at ways of reshaping their capacity in their plants to meet demand spikes where they will occur. So again, fairly worrying in terms of the workforce. It was very much stop-start. So you'd open a plant and it may be open for a week, and then someone was detected with COVID. This is what happened to the people in Illinois, in Chicago, where they're based. You know, one or two people started getting COVID. They had to shut the plant down straight away. So there's a lot of stop-start. You know, the infection has not got away. So it stops starting. It's not a smooth picture. There's a lot of fears for the UK that, you know, our infrastructural capacity, how much we're going to be able to put into infrastructure. People are less mobile at the moment. People are changing work patterns. You know, it's not certain. Are we going to go back to our previous patterns of behaviour? Will there be a need for the same amount of infrastructure we predicted? And that's going to have impact, you know, on the car industry and also on mobility and also on the infrastructural industry. There'll be another need for infrastructure. So again, the demand picture is very uncertain, insecure. The auto industry, like I said, the same thing, reshaping, redesigning demand. The supplies are back up and running. They're operating about 70% of capacity. They've got a 32-page document from the health and safety executive to work to. They return to work at night initially to lower the risks and manage the risks. The plants are slowly opening in Central and East Asia, Europe. They've had problems with the cash flow. It was a cash flow issue at the moment and going forward, where they can get the funds into the business, taking loans out from the Bank of Japan to maintain their operation. As they come out of furlough, what is the future going to be? I think, is there going to be enough demand to stimulate? You know, it's not just about not just asking the government to stimulate demand, but is there demand there to actually stimulate? John was saying it's the biggest challenge of his 30 years of working in the car industry. He's never experienced anything like it, such an ongoing crisis, and very much the capabilities about learning and reflection. So just to finish off, the supply chain world beyond the dam. It's increasingly becoming a business model issue. We could argue that financial viability is becoming more important now to these firms, both in America and the UK. There's going to be a reset position coming shortly of what this industry is going to look like. It's not that far away. We're talking September, October, we're going to start resetting. If there's not a second wave. There's no longer can we consider supply chains to be the supply side issues to be the main driver of resilience models. We're going to have to start looking a lot more at demand in terms of resilience planning and structural demand issues. We're looking a lot of the capabilities. What kind of capabilities do you need now and going into the future? What kind of networks are they going to become more localized and more adaptive to local situation? The idea of automation and putting more technology into the supply chain to improve its efficiency, to maintain it if we have pandemics in the future, to maintain production. It's very patchy. The disruptions, different regions are different. The recovery is not the same in all different levels, and there's lots of regional differences in recovery position around the world. So just to round up, we're a tsunami, Gaz. These companies have hit a tsunami. You know, it could get it's going to get stormy. Could it even get quite nasty? We could argue going forward for a lot of these companies. It's very much about economic pandemic more than a supply chain pandemic. That's what we're entering. Fundamental shifts, and you know, we've mistakenly just focused on supply when really demand is probably going to be the bigger issue going forward. And to me, when I was talking to Hayden yesterday in America, and they are in survival mode, and these are global multinational corporations talking of being in survival mode. So that just gives you a sense of the reality of this crisis. Beyond the kind of the academic debates I've been listening to recently about things like productivity. It's not productivity, it's survival. Now, the one silver lining, without being too depressing, is that we could open up opportunities for sustainability and a lower emission economy. And I think this is one of the opportunities we have now, going forward, that we could look at ways of operating over a lot more sustainability, a lot more resilient supply chains, looking at electric vehicles, transitioning to new forms of mobility, looking at ways of low carbon footprint. So we're definitely in that position where that is an opportunity if we want to take it. What we're going to have is going to be different to what went before. I don't think there's any doubt about it. But it's up to the role, I think, of governments as well as industry to try and push an agenda forward on that.
I appreciate for a really a whirlwind tour through many troubling issues. But we've got one question on the board and a couple in the pocket. But before we get to those, could I ask you please two very simple questions? My ignorance about supply chains. First, we're talking about, say, the UK firm with which you're dealing. Would this UK firm have network relationships and supply chain relationships with other companies and firms inside the UK? So like on this end, do we see that? And then I guess the other question I would have, just out of naivete, would they have only one supplier company, or would there be multiple that they'd be working with?
You mean the suppliers to them, or the suppliers?
Yeah, suppliers to them. Yeah, exactly.
They've got hundreds, Gary. So they've got they're working 9 product ranges from exhaust to cockpits to electric powertrains, and they've got hundreds of suppliers for each around the world.
Got it.
But remember, they're located in the UK, so their main primary focus is the UK market, and some of it will go into Europe. So it's very much funneling. You're funneling a huge network, and it funnels out as you go downstream into the UK, and then they will supply. They're what we call an OES, an original equipment supplier. So they will supply original equipment manufacturers. Their biggest customer is obviously Nissan.
Got it.
Yeah.
I want to come back to, but first, Paul Kelly has asked a question I'd like to lead with next, which would be, Paul asks, why do you think that these organizations didn't foresee that demand issues were the real long-term threat, rather than focusing on shorter-term supply issues?
It was too quick, Gaz. The falling demand was so quick because with the lockdown, you couldn't predict it. It's just too fast. It was too fast,
So the distinguishing characteristics then would, compared to previous crises and so on, because the people keeping the diaries are very experienced people.
Well, what you've got is you've had a collapse in demand, and then it's an ongoing crisis. So it's not just something which like 9/11 or a hurricane which happens for a day or two, and then you have 30 days to get back. This is ongoing over a long period of time, and demand has collapsed. And they've got stock in the system, so it's all backing up. So they've got cars in fields, around Newcastle, etc., and around Europe, and it's all stacking up. So it's all going back on the upstream down the supply chain. Paradoxically, it's going upstream, but we've got going down the supply chain. But you know what I mean? It's all stacking up. So they've got the stock in the system. Demand's collapsed faster than you've got rates here of decline. An industry such as the textiles halved in 3 years. Here you get an industries potentially with a demand planning which could be a third the size they are now within space of months. Do you know what I mean? So if you think the 80s were bad in northern England, I grew up in the northern England, and the 80s, when you're getting declines of industries of 21, 22, 23%, and people saying it's devastating. I mean, this is potentially in months rather than years. This could be unbelievable. You know what I mean? Unbelievable.
Yeah, I hear you. Let's a question that was posed by Louis, and basically, do you think that fintech will become more prominent in operating supply chains and reshaping business models even, so that we can address these issues with human capital and innovation to stimulate demand? So what about fintech and all this?
I think that's a fantastic question. I think yes, I think it's I definitely agree with that. I think it's an inevitable, one of the inevitable outcomes and changes which will occur. You know, things like transparency, visibility, automation, trying to make that more efficient and stimulate that. So I do agree with that. But Gary, you couldn't have brought that in this crisis. You know what I mean? You're talking of changes here which are going to take time to implement. You know what I mean? It's like Amazon. You know, you could say, oh, why hasn't Amazon got loads of robots to help in the warehouses when their demand exploded? Well, because it's so much quicker just to bring in labour in that situation. Do you know what I mean? It was so easier and quicker. You know, to get the robots up and running and all that, it's going to take time. And so I think the fintech, yes, but that will be when the time is right to bring it in. Do you know what I mean? You know, I've heard people saying things about, like been to some talks and people saying, oh, you've got to innovate in a crisis, to get out of COVID. You've got to innovate. It's a load of malarkey. You're not innovating. You're trying to survive. Do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
like,
no, fintech would be a
you've
new
got to look at the
investment.
reality.
Yeah.
It's a good investment, but it's going to take time to bring it in. And it will be one of the future developments going forward. But when you firefight, you know what I mean? You've got to look at what you can do in the short run to keep once the plants got up and running now. So you're getting the plant up and running. You're ramping up production slowly to get things moving a bit, and you're doing a staged, phased approach to it. So that's your top job at the moment, getting that back and trying to get some kind of business model up and running again.
Now let's stay on this. Actually, asks a very appropriate question. She heard, and I think we all heard you say about how the firms had replaced people with accountants, and this had affected their capacity for resilience. I heard you say that too, and I know that's an argument we've seen some academics and other critics make. Basically, could you say a little bit more about this? Is it about basically, going to those financial criteria that Valentina wonders what you mean exactly by accountants here? And in what way, could you elaborate a little bit more on that point?
So what is that? Which slide was that one, Gary? Can you?
That was a slide, I think it was in your discourse. You were talking about how the firms over time had moved toward more of more accountants and more financial criteria rather than people with, let's say, operational criteria for how the firms were operating through time and space. The kind of argument that we've seen.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, is that the idea was that like if you're going to build if you're going to build a supply network, and it kind of like links in with, I suppose, what Donald Trump's been saying in the United States, trying to repatriate production. Do you build your networks or where you're going to locate plants? Now, increasingly over the last 30 years, that plant decision has been driven by, I'd say, our entrepreneurial capital going to different parts of the world and looking where they can make a maximum return. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And remember that these businesses are scale businesses, and that's one of the things I didn't actually mention in the recovery. You're talking of scale. You're talking of very large businesses who need a certain level of output to operate with. Yeah, and likewise. So when you start pulling the entrepreneurial capital, you're looking at the risk and balancing that against the value and the return you can make in parts of the world. So you can locate and build huge plants, say in the Far East, which you cannot do in Europe. And North America, and you can see the margin, and the margin drives you. And I think most real life business people will, have operated like that. To be honest,
appreciate
in the
that.
last manufacturing in these big manufacturing companies.
Now, maybe specifically some of the questions around transportation and transport industries. Of course, when you have when we're looking at the Nissan up in the Tees Valley and all of that, we know that Nissan was already at a delicate moment. There were issues around Brexit, about access to the European market.
Exactly.
Now this thing comes down on their heads, and so if you could elaborate a little bit more. And then Catherine asked an interesting question. Let me say it here, and if I don't have it quite right, we can maybe she can fine tune us. She asks, to what extent has the availability of transport between countries affected the supply chains. For example, the fall in air freight capacity combined with the increased demand for that. So that's, have there been supply chain issues that have been exacerbated by this, or this just another nail in the coffin, she asks. And so just let me leave that there. She's got a part two, but let's
That's
stay with
good.
those two questions.
Yeah. During the lockdown from March to mid-May, no, because there's no production, Gary. You know what I mean? You close your plant, so you're not worried about getting your parts and your tools and product in the system. So that kind of like partly answers that. But yeah, I mean, as things have got up and running, border controls, problems getting your packaging back, transport restrictions, it's made it harder, obviously, because you're interconnected. Getting things from China back, obviously, has been problematic as people have been sucking products from China. Other companies have been sucking in products from China. We've seen that with the PPE, haven't we? And with at the beginning of the PPE crisis, similar kind of effect going on with the masks and things like that. So I think definitely yes, it's got an effect. But the production is so low at the moment, though, Gary. You know what I mean? You're operating 15-20% of what you can normally do. You know what I mean? You're building up slowly. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's how much stock's in the system, how much you're not in usual conditions here. So answering Catherine's question, I think if it were usual conditions, yeah, this would have been pretty catastrophic. But we're not in usual conditions. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's managed.
I agree. And now there's a second part of Catherine's question, which actually then merges with a question that Mahmoud has put forward. It goes back. If you could take us back to the slide that has that picture of the recovery curve.
This one from somewhere.
Right around number 6 or 5, yeah. For the MIT. No, actually.
Right at the beginning.
I think the one of the Mahmoud, tell me if this is right. This one here. Yeah. I think that's the one he means. Mahmoud, if you let us know if that's wrong. No, he means the other one.
No.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. He wants us to go to the economy one. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so the kind of double questions here. On the one hand, Catherine says, well, given that we've got this slow recovery profile for the aviation industry, how is this going to affect future supply chains? Mahmoud then says, well, about these recovery scenarios, based on what data is this curve built? And is it related to any previous crises, or is this kind of made up as they go along, so to speak?
I think it's just data they've aggregated to and modelled on different economic criteria, predicted economic growth and predicted employment and speed of lockdown. I don't know the specifics, but the different assumptions here, guys, going into this. So what it is this S&P is just, like you said, they'll be fairly simulated. There'll be some real data mixed with modelling data, and they've just predicted different on what's the rate of employment, unemployment, economic growth, government investment, government stimulus. So they tried to aggregate the different data together and then forecast forward. So answering your point, Mahmoud, it's a mixture of simulated and model data with actual real life projections, I'd argue. But no one really knows, Mahmoud. I don't think, to be honest. We don't know. Because remember as well in there, Mahmoud, we've got Brexit coming in. Do you know what I mean? Where would that fit into those scenarios? If there's a no deal, again, it'll change that scenario. So I'm just trying to give people a feel of there's different scenarios going on at the moment from consultants, from Treasury, maybe what way forward for us, and companies have got to come out log into those kind of projections to see as it affects them. So it's trying to get you to think that really when you look at supply chain, it's very dependent on the economy. You know what I mean? Especially these industries.
Actually, I got to say, if looking at this graph, I've been working as a member of the Productivity Insights Network, and this graph looks an awful lot like the so-called productivity paradox or problem, where the UK would be the C, and Europe would be, say, the B, and then maybe China would be the A. You know, like through these last years, there's been this problem of our slower recovery and pace of productivity growth. So you can see how, you know, this does reflect some recent scenarios, really post the subprime crisis, that really have not been worked out so well.
Well, I think partly that, Gary, is because we're such a service economy now. You know what I mean? So I think the services have been really hit by this crisis. And ongoing, you know.
Now there's an interesting question from Gabriella, and she asks, if automation solutions are making people redundant, won't this make demand issues worse? So unless you figure out some new roles for people to operate new machines, so what are the implications of automation for employment in the sector you study? Now I have to say that's a familiar question for us, Gary, but how about that?
I'd argue there's the car industry and the infrastructural industries, earth moving equipment. They're quite automated as they are, Gary. Really, you know what I mean? So they've got a lot of automation, robots in the plants, you know, warehouses, lots of artificial intelligence in there, a lot of machine learning. So I'd argue that, you know, Gabriella, they're fairly automated already. You know, it's if the automation can create more jobs, and what kind of new jobs will emerge from that automation. Will that counteract the loss in jobs? So I'd argue that, you know, automation again is a bit more of a longer run issue. I'd argue in this situation.
Yeah.
And I can't see it being integrated into these. I don't think it's an issue on their agenda at the moment with these executives we're talking about. They've got a bit in there. They've already got a bit of automation. They've seen some benefits of it. They've seen some negatives of it. They care about the workforce they've got. But there's no plans to.
In some sense, it's already there. And you mentioned some pretty big employment numbers for this industry in the UK, and that shows you that this is a part of our workforce that is already geared up for working in that way with automated work processes. So that's a real challenge if that goes down, and what happens next then.
Well, if the UK loses its car industry, manufacturing basically evaporates. You know what I mean? In Northern England, you know, a substantial chunk of economic car industry will be gone, and that'll be an absolute tragedy, in my opinion. You know what I mean?
Well, and this goes to that Louis has asked, which is, well, what's Nissan going to do about these cars in the fields? Great demand, and there's a global recession looming. Where do we go with this?
Well, I think we need, like we've had before, fire sales, car scrappage schemes, incentives to buy the vehicles. They've got to move those vehicles somehow.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I think if you're looking in the near future, you're going to get a good deal, to be honest.
Yeah,
but the economy, it links to leasing arrangements. It links to a lot of cars are leased now, on finance. Again, is the economy going to be strong enough to allow people to lease? You know.
Yeah, I was going to say now. I remember. I'm going to call on myself, Gary. A conversation we had several years ago about the challenge of recapturing manufacturing for the north of England, in particular, the northern part of the country, and we were talking about textile, which of course had been a foundational industry. We go down to the river here, and we see all the old buildings and all of that. Yeah. Now we were thinking, well, some of the textiles come home, and part of it was the idea of, say, responding to changes to the fashion industry, where there's a premium on rapidly evolving tastes, and really, not having months of delay while clothing comes from elsewhere in the world, but the possibility of doing it much faster. Now, in a sense, if you think of that, we were taking for granted that there would exist a strong consumer demand that could be met by a relocalized Yorkshire textile industry. So again, it's a question of where are the consumers for that?
Exactly. Yeah, you need a demand there to stimulate it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, you're right. And the capacity. I mean, you could argue. I mean, you could argue that the lockdown. Did we really need a lockdown, say, in parts of northern England for much of March? Probably not. You know what I mean? The crisis was particularly in London. For a lot of the crisis has been London, Birmingham, and then it went to Manchester. So again, there's issues of regionality. And you know what I mean? The parts of the northern economy definitely suffered from being locked down. For me, which was very much a London, Birmingham-centric crisis for the first month to 6 weeks of that in certain areas.
Yeah.
And we've gone back to that anyway, aren't we? We're going to look at localized outbreaks, which to me, it's what I mean. It's kind of like led to a massive collapse in demand. But you're right. I think you need a robust and wealthy enough local economy to enable, like you said, Gary, if it's textiles or whatever industries, to operate and to function, to get their business models up and running and surviving and developing.
Now,
that's very important.
Now let me go to. You brought up the word sustainable briefly in your discourse, and this was actually one of the questions asked in advance. But it's very pertinent. I'd like to push you a little bit to speculate if you could. The question was, will we be looking at more sustainable models, or will everything go back to normal? This, of course, after COVID. But in some sense, what would be your vision? What would sustainability look like? Is it about business models? Is it about the nature of the change? Is it the geography? How do we get a handle on that?
I think it's a great question. I think it's very relevant because often, you look at the short run, which is obviously an economic crisis. You look at whether you're going to keep a business going, can a business model survive, and then you look maybe in the medium to longer term. Can we have a more sustainable business models in operation? So say the car industry, can we have more electric vehicles? Can we have low emissions? I think we all benefited from clean air. I certainly did. Being able to go and breathe natural clean air. You could definitely tell the difference a little bit. I don't know if you spotted that, but it was a nice feeling. So I think it's going to happen. And when I've pushed both John and Hayden about this, and John came back, one of the problems they've got with electric vehicles, if you want a Porsche, electric Porsche, you know what I mean, guys? You'll probably got to get one more than me, but say you wanted an electric Porsche, there's a year waiting list, and they can't get the processor in place. So the process innovation's 3 years behind the product innovation. They're struggling to make enough. So I think that there's a commitment to offer more electric vehicles, low emission economy. I think is on the agenda. But again, it's going to be through public and private partnership coming together, and trying to push that agenda, and influence and change behaviour and look more towards more sustainable business models. So it's there. It's on the agenda. A lot of academics want to change the world and believe they can change the world, and they believe that their view of the world is the only view. But sometimes you've got to listen to industry. You've got to listen to what the economists are saying, what the industrialists are saying, the government are saying, and somehow they've got to blend together at some stage.
Yeah.
And incentivize that kind of movement, if that makes sense.
It does, and I think we are looking at. I know that we've been working a little bit with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and we're trying to think of short run, medium run, and long run.
Yeah.
Ideally, shifting consumption patterns, that gives you that chance to rethink. Although I have to say, Gary, for the record, as a third generation Polish American, the debate in my household was Chevy versus Ford. I think if I ever brought home a Porsche, my family would know I'd lost my mind. So I think we don't have to worry about that one.
Joking.
But about those, those Nissans are sitting there for a demand that's in flux. We're looking at new kinds of automobiles and so on. How many of those Nissans in the fields are basically hybrid vehicles? How many of them are electric vehicles? That kind of thing would be part of the transition, right?
I think so. Yeah, there'll be a mixture of them, Gary. To be honest, some will be hybrid, some will be electric, and some will be just fuel emission. And I think it's right. And I think we're at that stage with these companies where they're kind of like a mixed number of initiatives going on. So they've got some like hybrid, some fuel, some electric, and trying to push them more down the electric route is what we want. But that's going to come from government. That's going to come from the people to push that agenda, to facilitate that in cities. You know what I mean?
I do.
And mobility. So it's going to take time. It's you can't just invent things overnight. You're talking a big companies, scale businesses, scale networks. So it's going to take. It's like a massive juggernaut. What needs to be changing direction and reshaped. But it will happen. It will happen.
Yeah, I hear you.
It's got to happen, really.
If I could, I see that we're close to time, and I think you said a lot, but I have one question I want to throw by you, just because a book that's just been published, I haven't had a chance to read it yet, is called "Trade Wars Are Class Wars,"
Right.
And it goes to this idea that when we see, for example, Donald Trump, in the U.S.-China trade war and so on, that's about the dynamics of a frustrated working class. Indeed, lots of people in my family in the U.S. are, working class people where the grandfathers and fathers had the jobs, the industrial jobs. Now they're gone. So there's, this notion of the local dynamics. But it seems that in some sense, we have this challenge here where maintaining global supply chains or finding a way to keep this globalized system of distribution, production, consumption going is now linked to preserving some of the industrial and manufacturing jobs that we still have. Is this a paradox, or what do we do with this?
It's a $50 million question, isn't it? I think because the cost advantages are so great in the Far East and in places like China for a lot of components and a lot of products, it's going to take 70 or 80, it's going to take 50 or 60% tariffs on them goods, Gary, to make say an American auto manufacturer competitive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So and what you've got in the Far East now is you've got a lot of innovation going on. You've got lots of high quality production going on, lots of investment. You know what I mean? So it's not just like a low cost. That's a big issue, but there are other issues going on as well. That they're good on the technology. And I think it's going to take a lot more than tariffs. I think it's going to take a massive ramping up of training, of skills, of expertise, of competences. Of building, local capability, and again, getting at the frontiers of these innovation agendas going forward. Do you know what I mean? And getting involved with them, and it can be done. Tesla have done it. Google are doing it. There are companies where they are driving forward high tech, and it's trying to bring these high techs and then get the workforce with the capability to be able to make these goods and to develop their businesses and niches.
I hear you. I think in some sense, in those capabilities, Gabrielle reminds us here as we're wrapping up that we have to think about the question of just transitions. I mean, something that's readily clear as we look at the crisis as it's unfolded is that both the incidence of COVID transmission and the frontline workers and people in poverty most exposed, etc. In some cases, people engaged in manufacturing jobs. There's many points of intersection there, and so basically, moving toward that sustainable future has to also be about just transition.
What you've got to create is the UK. Before the Americans took over after the First World War, the UK was known as the workshop of the world. Do you know what I mean? Lots of small entrepreneurs, innovation. Victorians give us lots of ways of innovation, manufacturing innovation, inventing things from clocks to spectacles all the way through, and we were very successful. And I think it's calling for that in this next wave is to move away from financial services and the reliance on retailing, and start investing in looking at building a future workshop of the world, which will be lots of small businesses niche linked to the eco-environment. But that's going to take a lot of concerted effort, Gary, and a lot of resources. You know what I mean? It's not like you have to magic wand. You're talking of a generational change there. You know what I mean? It's easy to wipe out industry. Margaret Thatcher wiped out northern industry within 3 years. It's going to take a lot longer to rebuild, you know what I mean, future industry, if we want to do it, if that makes sense, you know?
Yeah, it does, and actually, it reminds me of a book by David Edgerton, who talked about the success and failure of the British nation, reminding us that mid-century, in the early part of the 20th century, Great Britain was the workshop of the world and was the esteemed industrial power. That's been lost over time. So, can we reinvent that for the sustainable future? That's a challenge. And maybe, I guess Mariana Mazzucato would talk about, mission-oriented government and so on, and mission-oriented policy. Maybe that's a mission worth taking on.
Yes, I agree.
So,
yeah.
Now I got to say our time is let's say I think we've cleared our questions, and I'd like us all to just give a round of, let's say, social distance applause for a great session. Gary Graham from the Leeds University Business School. Come back to us a week from today, and we will have Dr. Joe Ingold, who will take us forward with our next scheduled event. So a week from today, same time. And thank you again, Gary, for a wonderful talk.
That's right. Thank you, Gary.
Excellent. Gary, that was brilliant. Thank you for that. Peter, thanks for your support and your contributions. It's been good to see this thing build and grow. And Peter, do we have a date yet for our dean? I think maybe I cannot activate. Sarah, can Peter speak as a participant, not a moderator? All right, I think we'll let it go. Thank you, everybody, and we will see you all soon. Bye-bye.